Good morning, guys. Hope you're all doing okay this morning. We're carrying on with our book that we started yesterday called Who Moved My Cheese? So get yourselves comfy and I shall carry on. They went farther into the maze, up and down corridors, looking for cheese in every cheese station they could find. They didn't think of anything else but finding new cheese. They didn't find any for some time until they finally went into an area of the maze where they had never been before, Cheese Station N. They squealed with delight. They found what they had been looking for, a great supply of new cheese. They could hardly believe their eyes. It was the biggest store of cheese the mice had ever seen. In the meantime, Hem and Haw were still back in Cheese Station C, evaluating their situation. They were now suffering from the effects of having no cheese. They were becoming frustrated and angry and were blaming each other for the situation they were in. Now and then, Haw thought about his mice friends, Sniff and Scurry, and wondered if they had found any cheese yet. He believed they might be having a hard time, as running through the maze usually involves some uncertainty. But he also knew that it was likely to only last for a while. Sometimes Haw would imagine Sniff and Scurry finding new cheese and enjoying it. He thought about how good it would be for him to be out on an adventure in the maze and to find fresh new cheese. He could almost taste it. The more clearly Haw saw the image of himself finding and enjoying the new cheese, the more he saw himself leaving Cheese Station C. "Let's go," he exclaimed all of a sudden. "No," Hem quickly responded. "I like it here. It's comfortable. It's what I know. Besides, it's dangerous out there." "No, it isn't," Haw argued. "We've run through many parts of the maze before and we can do it again." "I'm getting too old for that," Hem said, and I'm afraid I'm not interested in getting lost and making a fool of myself. Are you?" With that, Haw's fear of failing returned and his hope of finding new cheese faded. So every day, the little people continued to do what they had done before. They went to Cheese Station C, found no cheese, and returned home carrying their worries and frustrations with them. They tried to deny what was happening, but found it harder to get to sleep, had less energy the next day, and were becoming irritable. Their homes were not the nurturing places they once were. The little people had difficulty sleeping and were having nightmares about not finding any cheese. But Hem and Haw still returned to Cheese Station C and waited there every day. Hem said, "You know, if we just work harder, we'll find that nothing has really changed that much. The cheese is probably nearby. Maybe they just hid it behind the wall." The next day, Hem and Haw returned with tools. Hem held the chisel, while Haw banged on the hammer until they made a hole in the wall of Cheese Station C. They peered inside but found no cheese. They were disappointed but believed they could solve the problem. So they started earlier, stayed longer, and worked harder. But after a while, all they had was a large hole in the wall. Haw was beginning to realise the difference between activity and productivity. "Maybe," Hem said, "we should just sit here and see what happens. Sooner or later, they have to put the cheese back." Haw wanted to believe that. So each day he went home to rest and returned reluctantly with Hem to Cheese Station C. But cheese never reappeared. By now, the little people were growing weak from hunger and stress. Haw was getting tired of just waiting for their situation to improve. He began to see that the longer they stayed in their cheese situation, the worse off they would be. Haw knew they were losing their edge. Finally, one day, Haw began laughing at himself. Haw, look at us. We keep doing the same things over and over again and wonder why things don't get better. If this wasn't so ridiculous, it would be even funnier." Haw did not like the idea of having to run through the maze again, because he knew he would get lost and have no idea where he would find any cheese. But he had to laugh at his folly when he saw what his fear was doing to him. He asked Hem, "Where did we put our running shoes? It took a long time to find them because they had put everything away when they found their cheese at Cheese Station C, thinking they wouldn't be needing them anymore." As Hem saw his friend getting into his running gear, he said, You're not really going out into the maze again, are you? Why don't you just wait here with me until they put the cheese back? Because you just don't get it, Hall said. I didn't want to see it either, but now I realise they're never going to put yesterday's cheese back. It's time to find new cheese. Hem argued. But what if there is no cheese out there? Or even if there is, what if you don't find it? I don't know, Hall said. He had asked himself those questions too many times and felt the fears again that kept him where he was. He asked himself, where am I more likely to find cheese, here or in the maze? He painted a picture in his mind. He saw himself venturing out into the maze with a smile on his face. While this picture surprised him, it made him feel good. He saw himself getting lost now and then in the maze, but felt confident he would eventually find new cheese out there and all the good things that came with it. He gathered his courage. Then he used his imagination to paint the most believable picture he could, with the most realistic details of him finding and enjoying the taste of new cheese. He saw himself eating Swiss cheese with holes in it, bright orange cheddar and American cheeses, Italian mozzarella, and wonderfully soft French camembert cheese. And then he heard Hem say something and realised they were still at Cheese Station C. Hall said, sometimes, Hem, things change and they are never the same again. This looks like one of those times. That's life. Life moves on, and so should we. Hall looked at his emaciated companion and tried to talk sense to him, but Hem's fear had turned into anger and he wouldn't listen. Hall didn't mean to be rude to his friend, but he had to laugh at how silly they both looked. As Hall prepared to leave, he started to feel more alive, knowing that he was finally able to laugh at himself, let go and move on. Hall laughed and announced, it's maze time. Hem didn't laugh and he didn't respond. Hall picked up a small sharp rock and wrote a serious thought on the wall for Hem to think about. As was his custom, Hall even drew a picture of cheese around it, hoping it would help Hem to smile, lighten up and go after the new cheese. But Hem didn't want to see it. It read, if you do not change, you can become extinct. Then Hall stuck his head out and peered anxiously into the maze. He thought about how he'd gotten himself into this cheeseless situation. He had believed that there may not be any cheese in the maze, or he may not find it. Such fearful beliefs were immobilizing and killing him. Hall smiled. He knew Hem was wondering, who moved my cheese? But Hall was wondering, why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? As he started out into the maze, Hall looked back to where he had come from and felt its comfort. He could feel himself being drawn back into familiar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese here for some time. Hall became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and stared at it for some time. What would you do if you weren't afraid? He thought about it. He knew sometimes some fear can be good. When you are afraid of things, when you are afraid things are going to get worse if you don't do something, it can prompt you into action. But it is not good when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looked to his right, to the part of the maze where he had never been, and felt the fear. Then he took a deep breath, turned right into the maze, and jogged slowly into the unknown. As he tried to find his way, Hall worried at first that he might have waited too long in Cheese Station C. He hadn't any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he ever got the chance again, he would get out of his comfort zone and adapt to change sooner. It would make things easier. Then Hall smiled a weak smile as he thought, better late than never. During the next several days, Hall found a little cheese here and there, but nothing that lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese to take some back to Hem and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Horde didn't feel confident enough yet. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seemed to have changed since the last time he was out here. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridors. It seemed his progress was 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that being back in the maze, hunting for cheese, wasn't nearly as bad as he feared it might be. As time went on, he began to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect to find new cheese. He wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realizing that he had nothing to chew on at that moment. Whenever he started to get discouraged, he reminded himself that what he was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless situation. He was taking control rather than simply letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself, if Sniff and Scurry could move on, so could he. Later, as Hall looked back on things, he realised that the cheese at Cheese Station C had not just disappeared overnight, as he had once believed. The amount of cheese that had been there towards the end had been getting smaller, and what was left had grown old. It didn't taste as good. Mould may even have begun to grow on the old cheese, although he hadn't noticed it. He had to admit, however, that if he had wanted to, he probably could have seen what was coming, but he didn't. Hall now realised that the change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scurry had been doing. He decided he would stay more alert from now on. He would expect change to happen and look for it. He would trust his basic instincts to sense when change was going to occur and be ready to adapt to it. He stopped for a rest and wrote on the wall of the maze, "Smell the cheese often, so you know when it's getting old." Sometime later, after not finding cheese for what seemed like a long time, Haw finally came across a huge cheese station, which looked promising. When he went inside, however, he was most disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This empty feeling has happened to me too often, he thought. He felt like giving up. Haw was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he would not survive. He thought about turning around and heading back to Cheese Station C. At least if he made it back and Hem was still there, Haw wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again. What would I do if I weren't afraid? Haw thought he was past his fear, but he was afraid more often than he liked to admit, even to himself. He wasn't always sure what he was afraid of, but in his weakened condition, he knew now he was simply fearful of going on alone. Haw didn't know it, but he was running behind because he was still weighed down by fearful beliefs. Haw wondered if Hem had moved on, or if he was still paralysed by his own fears. Then Haw remembered the times when he had felt his best in the maze. It was when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knowing it was as much a reminder to himself as it was a marking for his friend Hem, hopefully to follow. Movement in a new direction helps you find new cheese. Haw looked down the dark passageway and was aware of his fear. What lay ahead? Was it empty? Or worse, were there dangers lurking? He began to imagine all kinds of frightening things that could happen to him. He was scaring himself to death. Then he laughed at himself. He realised his fears were making things worse, so he did what he would do if he weren't afraid. He moved in a new direction. As he started running down the dark corridor, he began to smile. Haw didn't realise it yet. Sorry. But he was discovering what nourished his soul. He was letting go and trusting what lay ahead for him, even though he did not know exactly what it was. To his surprise, Haw started to enjoy himself more and more. Why do I feel so good? He wondered. I don't have any cheese and I don't know where I'm going. Before long, he knew why he felt good. He stopped to write again on the wall. When you stop being afraid, you feel good. Hall realised he had been held captive by his own fear. Moving in a new direction had freed him. Now he felt the cool breeze that was blowing in this part of the maze, and it was refreshing. He took in some deep breaths and felt invigorated by the movement. Once he had gotten past his fear, it turned out to be more enjoyable than he once believed it could be. Hall hadn't felt this way for a long time. He had almost forgotten how much fun it was to go for it. To make things even better, Hall started to paint a picture in his mind again. He saw himself in great realistic detail, sitting in the middle of a pile of all his favourite cheeses, from cheddar to brie. He saw himself eating the many cheeses he liked, and he enjoyed what he saw. Then he imagined how much he would enjoy all their great tastes. The more clearly he saw the image of himself enjoying new cheese, the more real and believable it became. He could sense that he was going to find it. He wrote, "Imagining yourself enjoying your new cheese leads you to it." Hall kept thinking about what he could gain instead of what he was losing. He wondered why he had always thought that a change would lead to something worse. Now he realised that change could lead to something better. Why didn't I see this before? He asked himself. Then he raced through the maze with greater strength and agility. Before long, he spotted a cheese station and became excited as he noticed little pieces of new cheese near the entrance. They were types of cheese he had never seen before, but they looked great. He tried them and found that they were delicious. He ate most of the new cheese bits that were available and put a few in his pocket to have later and perhaps share with Hem. He began to regain his strength. He entered the cheese station with great excitement, but to his dismay, he found it was empty. Someone had already been there and had left only the few bits of new cheese. He realised that if he had moved sooner, he would very likely have found a good deal of new cheese here. Hall decided to go back and see if Hem was ready to join him. As he retraced his steps, he stopped and wrote on the wall, "The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you find new cheese." After a while, Hall made his way back to Cheese Station C and found Hem. He offered Hem bits of new cheese, but was turned down. Hem appreciated his friend's gesture, but said, "I don't think I would like new cheese. It's not what I'm used to. I want my own cheese back, and I'm not going to change until I get what I want." Hall just shook his head in disappointment and reluctantly went back out on his own. As he returned to the farthest point he had reached in the maze, he missed his friend, but realised he liked what he was discovering. Even before he found what he hoped would be a great supply of new cheese, if ever, he knew that what made him happy wasn't just having cheese. He was happy when he wasn't being wrung by his fear. He liked what he was doing now. Knowing this, Hall didn't feel as weak as he did when he stayed in Cheese Station C with no cheese. Just realising he was not letting his fear stop him, and knowing that he had taken a new direction, nourished him and gave him strength. Now he felt that it was just a question of time before he found what he needed. In fact, he sensed he had already found what he was looking for. He smiled as he realised. It is safer to search in the maze than remain in a cheeseless situation. Hall realised again, as he had once before, that what you are afraid of is never as bad as what you imagine. The fear you let build up in your mind is worse than the situation that actually exists. He'd been so afraid of never finding new cheese that he didn't even want to start looking. But since starting his journey, he had found enough cheese in the corridors to keep him going. Now he looked forward to finding more. Just looking ahead was becoming exciting. His old thinking had been clouded by his worries and fears. He used to think about not having enough cheese. or not having it last as long as he wanted. He used to think more about what could go wrong than what could go right. But that had changed in the days since he had left Cheese Station C. He used to believe that cheese should never be moved and that change wasn't right. Now he realised it was natural for change to continually occur. Whether you expect it or not, change could surprise you only if you didn't expect it and weren't looking for it. When he realised he had changed his beliefs, he paused to write on the wall, "Old beliefs do not lead you to new cheese." Hor hadn't found any cheese yet, but as he ran through the maze, he thought about what he had already learned. Hor now realised that his new beliefs were encouraging new behaviours. He was behaving differently than when he kept returning to the same cheeseless station. He knew that when you change what you believe, you change what you do. You can believe that a change will harm you and resist it. Or you can believe that finding new cheese will help you and embrace the change. It all depends on what you choose to believe. He wrote on the wall, "When you see that you can find and enjoy new cheese, you change course." Hor knew he would be in better shape now if he had dealt with the change much sooner and left Cheese Station C earlier. He would feel stronger in body and spirit, and he could have coped better with the challenge of finding new cheese. In fact, he probably would have found it by now if he had expected change, rather than wasting time denying that the change had already taken place. He used his imagination again and saw himself finding and savouring new cheese. He decided to proceed into the more unknown parts of the maze and found little bits of cheese here and there. Hor began to regain his strength and confidence. As he thought back on where he had come from, Hor was glad he had written on the wall in many places. He trusted that it would serve as a marked trail for him to follow through the maze if he ever chose to leave Cheese Station C. Hor just hoped he was heading in the right direction. He thought about the possibility that Hem would read the handwriting on the wall and find his way. He wrote on the wall what he had been thinking about for some time. Noticing small changes early helps you adapt to the bigger changes that are to come. By now, Hor had let go of the past and was adapting to the present. He continued on through the maze with greater strength and speed. And before long, it happened. When it seemed like he had been in the maze forever, his journey, or at least this part of the journey, ended quickly and happily. Hor proceeded along a corridor that was new to him, rounded a corner, and found new cheese at Cheese Station N. When he went inside, he was startled by what he saw. Piled high everywhere was the greatest supply of cheese he had ever seen. He didn't recognise all that he saw, as some kinds of cheese were new to him. Then he wondered for a moment whether it was real or just his imagination, until he saw his old friends, Sniff and Scurry. Sniff welcomed Hor with a nod of his head, and Scurry waved his paw. Their fat little bellies showed that they'd been here for some time. Hor quickly said his hellos and soon took bites of every one of his favourite cheeses. He pulled off his shoes, tied the laces together, and hung them around his neck in case he needed them again. Sniff and Scurry laughed. They nodded their heads in admiration. Then Hor jumped into the new cheese. When he had eaten his fill, he lifted a piece of fresh cheese and made a toast. Hooray for change! As Hor enjoyed the new cheese, he reflected on what he had learned. He realised that when he had been afraid to change, he had been holding on to the illusion of old cheese that was no longer there. So what was it that made him change? Was it the fear of starving to death? Hor smiled as he thought it certainly helped. Then he laughed and realised that he had started to change as soon as he had learned to laugh at himself and what he had been doing wrong. He realised the fastest way to change is to laugh at your own folly. Then you can let go and quickly move on. He knew he had learned something useful about moving on from his mice friends, Sniff and Scurry. They kept life simple. They didn't overanalyze or overcomplicate things. When the situation changed and the cheese had been moved, they changed and moved with the cheese. He would remember that. Hoare had also used his wonderful brain to do what little people do better than mice. He envisioned himself in realistic detail, finding something better, much better. He reflected on the mistakes he had made in the past and used them to plan for his future. He knew that you could learn to deal with change. You could be more aware of the need to keep things simple, be flexible, and move quickly. You did not need to overcomplicate matters or confuse yourself with fearful beliefs. You could notice when the little changes began so that you would be better prepared for the big change that might be coming. He knew he needed to adapt faster, for if you do not adapt in time, you might as well not adapt at all. He had to admit that the biggest inhibitor to change lies within yourself and that nothing gets better until you change. Perhaps most importantly, he realised that there is always new cheese out there, whether you recognise it at the time or not, and that you are rewarded with it when you go past your fear and enjoy the adventure. He knew some fear should be respected, as it can keep you out of real danger, but he realised most of his fears were irrational and had kept him from changing when he needed to. He didn't like it at the time, but he knew that the change had turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it led him to find better cheese. He had even found a better part of himself. As Hoare recalled what he had learned, he thought about his friend Hem. He wondered if Hem had read any of the sayings Hoare had written on the wall at Cheese Station C and throughout the maze. Had Hem ever decided to let go and move on? Had he ever entered the maze and discovered what could make his life better? Or was Hem still hemmed in because he would not change? Hoare thought about going back again to Cheese Station C to see if he could find Hem, assuming Hoare could find his way back there. If he found Hem, he thought he might be able to show him how to get out of his predicament. But Hoare realised that he had already tried to get his friend to change. Hem had to find his own way, beyond his comforts and past his fears. No one else could do it for him or talk him into it. He somehow had to see the advantage of changing himself. Hoare knew he had left a trail for Hem and that he could find his way if he could just read the handwriting on the wall. He went over and wrote down a summary of what he had learned on the largest wall of Cheese Station M. He drew a large piece of cheese around all the insights he had become aware of and smiled as he looked at what he had learned. Change happens. They keep moving the cheese. Anticipate change. Get ready for the cheese to move. Monitor change. Smell the cheese often so you know when it's getting old. Adapt to change quickly. The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you can enjoy new cheese. Change. Move with the cheese. Enjoy change. Savour the adventure and enjoy the taste of new cheese. Be ready to change quickly and enjoy it again and again. They keep moving the cheese. Right, I'm going to stop there for today. Hope you enjoyed that next little section of Who Moved My Cheese. It's really interesting, actually, isn't it? Really talking about, how we adapt to change and how we, different people deal with it differently. And I'm finding it really interesting. I hope you guys are as well. I think we'll probably get that one finished tomorrow. We haven't got an awful lot left. So if you enjoyed it today and fancy hearing the rest of the book, join me again tomorrow at 10:30. Be back on in a bit, about 11:30 for some tea and toast and a catch up with Luke. So join me then if you can. If not, have a great day. See you later.